I stood in the snow for 6 endless hours, waiting for my son to open the door. He never did. And as the cold bit through my knees, I realized something that changed everything. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the warmth that's returned when you give it. That night, humiliation froze into resolve. By morning, I wasn't the same man anymore. The pain that once broke me became the fire that rebuilt me. And this is how I turned silence, betrayal, and winter itself into my greatest revenge. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Winter in Bloomington, Minnesota had a way of silencing everything. Snow piled along the curbs, the air hung sharp enough to sting, and even the old maple trees bowed under its weight, like soldiers too tired to stand straight. I could hear the creak of my house as the wind pressed against its siding. The same little house Ellen and I bought 40 years ago, when Brian was still running around in footy pajamas. Now, the rooms felt too large, the walls echoing every tick of the clock and hum of the heater. I woke each morning before sunrise out of habit, poured 2 cups of coffee, though I drank only 1, and turned on the local AM station just to hear another voice. The anchor's cheerful weather reports were a kind of lie. The Midwest cold was never cheerful, only honest. At 66, my days were slow but predictable. Fixing the neighbor's lawnmower in summer, shoveling their driveways come winter. It kept my hands from forgetting what they'd been trained to do. I'd worked as a mechanic my whole life, built my reputation on being reliable, the kind of man who didn't need to say much because his word was enough. When Ellen died 7 years ago, I lost more than a wife. I lost the one person who translated my silence into love. Brian had her eyes, and once her kindness. He used to come by every Sunday for dinner. Back then, he'd laugh about my old truck, promise to teach his future kids to change their own oil, call me the toughest man alive. Then came Paige. She was polite the first year, even brought me a bottle of imported whiskey for Christmas. But over time, the warmth cooled. She started making little jokes about my humble lifestyle, as if simplicity were a flaw. Her parents, Richard and Elaine Walker, were the kind who measured success by brand names and square footage. They hosted fundraisers for causes they couldn't pronounce and called it culture. I didn't fit their version of family. I was background noise, a relic that came attached to Brian like an old piece of furniture he couldn't throw away. Still, I wanted him to have the life Ellen dreamed for him, a good home, security, a future brighter than mine. When he told me he couldn't afford a house in Edina, I offered to help. I refinanced my own mortgage, pulled from Ellen's life insurance, and gifted him $35,000 for a down payment. Then, at his insistence, I set up an automatic transfer, $2,450 every month to help with the mortgage. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he got stable. That was 4.5 years ago. Every month I'd watch the debit appear on my bank statement, a line of numbers that felt like penance. I told myself it was love, not weakness. I told myself it was what a father does. Sometimes I'd drive by their house, a white colonial with bay windows and a driveway long enough for 2 SUVs. The kind of place Ellen used to circle in the Sunday paper and whisper, "Maybe someday." I'd see their lights glowing through the frost and imagine laughter inside, a family gathering where maybe my name was mentioned with affection. But lately, the warmth I'd imagined had started to cool. The last time I visited, Paige greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're keeping things simple this Christmas," she said, straightening a garland on their staircase that probably cost more than my whole tree. "Richard and Elaine were visiting," she explained, "and they preferred intimate family holidays. I wasn't sure if that meant there wasn't room for me, or that there wasn't room for someone like me." I stood in their foyer, staring at the framed family photo above the fireplace. Brian stood tall at the center, Paige beside him, her parents flanking the other side. I was off to the corner, half lit, as though the photographer hadn't noticed me there. Maybe that was the point. The drive home that night was quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. Snow drifted across the highway in thin veils that caught the headlights like ghosts. I kept replaying the moment Brian avoided my eyes when I offered to bring my apple pie for Christmas dinner. Ellen's recipe, the one she'd perfected every December. "Maybe next year, Dad," he'd said, his voice quick, practiced. "We've got plans with Paige's family. Next year." That promise had started to sound like an expiration date. Back at home, I sat by the window with my untouched cup of coffee and watched the houses across the street blink with red and green lights. Each one glowed like a life I used to have. Somewhere between the hum of the furnace and the tick of the clock, I realized that every dollar I'd sent, every sacrifice I'd made, was an attempt to buy back belonging. And yet, no matter how much I gave, I was always standing outside, half in the frame, half forgotten. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and could almost hear Ellen whispering what I already knew but refused to say aloud. Love without respect isn't love at all. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal left you breathless, you'll understand what comes next. Stay with me, this story is only getting started. The week before Christmas arrived with the kind of cold that scraped the lungs clean. The neighborhood glittered in its yearly disguise. Icicle lights along roof lines, wreaths on every door, but to me the brightness felt like static. I filled my mornings with small rituals, sweeping the porch, feeding the birds, checking the oil in my truck, even when it didn't need checking. Anything to keep my hands busy while my thoughts circled the same quiet wish. That maybe, this year, things would be different. Maybe Brian and I would spend Christmas together like we used to. That afternoon, I picked up the phone and called him. "I thought I'd make Mom's apple pie," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I can bring it over Christmas Eve if that's all right." There was a pause, the kind that told me something unspoken was sitting between us. Sure, Dad," Brian said, voice thin as a worn-out string. Then another voice cut in, Paige's. Her tone was smooth, polite, and sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, Harold, that's so thoughtful," she said. "Just remember, this year we're doing smart casual for dinner. And please don't bring anything too spicy or with strong smells. My parents are sensitive." I stood there holding the phone, staring out at the bare trees trembling under the weight of snow. "Right," I said. "Wouldn't want to upset anyone's nose." Her laugh was a small, practiced sound, like the click of fine china. "You're so funny, Harold. We'll see you then." The line went dead before I could reply. For a long moment, I just listened to the hum of the house, the refrigerator's low buzz, the wind pressing against the glass. When Ellen was alive, the same season smelled of cinnamon and pine, the kitchen noisy with her humming. We'd set an extra chair for neighbors who had nowhere else to go. She used to say Christmas wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. Now, her presence lived only in the recipe cards she'd written in looping cursive, and the apple pie tin I kept on the top shelf. I tried to shake off the ache, telling myself Paige didn't mean harm, that some people were simply raised to see kindness as inconvenience. I busied myself in the garage, sorting tools already sorted, until evening came and the house dimmed. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Brian. "Dad, this year it might be best if you skip Christmas unless you're ready to apologize for the gala incident. Paige's parents are still upset." I read the words twice, then a third time. "Apologize?" I whispered, though no one could hear me. The memory of that night came back clear. The Rotary Club's holiday gala, the rented ballroom downtown, the music too loud and the wine too expensive. I'd worn my best suit, the one Ellen bought me 20 years ago. And when Richard offered me a gold tie, I'd smiled and said, "This one's done me fine for decades." Later over dinner, someone bragged about donating to a hospital fund, and I'd mentioned the free clinic near my neighborhood that couldn't even afford new thermometers. The table went quiet for a heartbeat before Paige changed the subject. That was all. Apparently, honesty had become indecent. Now, it was an incident. I set the phone down on the counter, its blue light glowing against the kitchen tiles. My chest tightened, not from anger, but something colder, older, a grief that came from being quietly erased. I thought of Ellen again, how she'd nudge my arm and whisper, "Don't let pride turn you bitter." She'd always believed Brian would grow into the kind of man who remembered where he came from. Maybe she was wrong, or maybe I was, for believing I could buy back closeness with mortgage payments. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at the reflection on the surface, and saw a man who'd spent years confusing generosity with love. Outside, a few kids were building a snowman under a streetlight, their laughter drifting through the cold like tiny bells. I wondered what it would feel like to laugh without fear of being an inconvenience. Before bed, I stepped out to the porch. The street was still, the snow gleaming like powdered glass. Across the road, families moved behind glowing windows, mothers setting tables, fathers untangling lights, lives unfolding naturally while mine stayed frozen in waiting. I caught my reflection in the window pane, faint and ghost-like, the outline of a man standing just outside the celebration he paid for. The thought came without warning, clean and sharp. Maybe I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe I never had. I whispered to the night, "If they want class, why make someone else pay for it?" The wind carried no answer, only the soft hiss of snow sliding from the roof, the sound of something giving way. If you've ever wondered how it feels to realize the people you love see you as a burden, not a blessing, don't go anywhere. What happens next will hit harder than you expect. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in silence and frost. The world outside my window looked clean, untouched, as if it didn't remember the years of disappointment leading up to it. I woke before sunrise, the habit of a man who could no longer sleep past hope. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, strong enough to disguise the nerves that sat heavy in my stomach. On the counter sat Ellen's old pie tin, polished to a dull shine, filled with the apple pie I'd baked the night before. The crust had cracked slightly along one edge, but it looked good enough for family. By 8, I was on the road, my truck's heater wheezing against the bitter air. The streets were almost empty except for a few bundled figures shoveling snow. I told myself this was what fathers did. They showed up, no matter what. Even when the invitation came with conditions. Even when pride whispered to turn around. When I reached Brian's neighborhood, I slowed, staring at the house I'd helped him buy. The roofline was trimmed with perfect white lights, the kind that made a home look like a catalog page. Through the large windows, I saw movement. Paige laughing with someone, her hair catching the glow of the chandelier. For a moment, I imagined Ellen beside me, saying, "Go on, Harold. They're your family." I stepped out of the truck, clutching the pie like an offering, and walked up the stone path dusted with fresh snow. The doorbell chimed somewhere inside. A minute later, the door opened, releasing a wave of heat and the scent of roasted meat. Paige stood there in a red dress, flawless, smiling the way people do when they want you gone. "Harold," she said softly, "before you come in, there's something we need to clear up." I frowned. "Clear up?" She gestured toward the porch. "My mother is still deeply hurt about last year's gala. She believes you disrespected her. And in our family, we believe in actions, not words. If you want to make peace, you'll need to show remorse." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to apologize?" "Yes," she said. "Kneel right here in the snow. 6 hours should do. Consider it symbolic cleansing. After that, you're welcome inside." For a heartbeat, I waited for laughter. A cruel joke, maybe, meant to sting but not wound, but her face didn't move. From behind her shoulder, I saw Brian, my son, standing in the hallway, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His eyes met mine for half a second before sliding away. "Paige," I said quietly, "this is ridiculous." She shrugged. "Then I suppose you will be spending Christmas somewhere else." And with that, she shut the door. The lock clicked like a verdict. At first, I just stood there. Maybe they were testing me, I thought. Maybe after 10 minutes, they'd open the door, laughing, tell me it was a misunderstanding. But time stretched, heavy and merciless. Snow began to fall again, dusting my shoulders, my hat, the pie box sitting untouched on the step. Through the window, I caught glimpses of people moving inside. Paige's parents arriving, Brian pouring wine, the shimmer of cutlery. An hour passed, then another. My knees ached from the cold porch tiles. My fingers burned, then went numb. By the fourth hour, I stopped feeling the pain at all. The world had narrowed to the muffled sound of laughter behind glass and the faint ringing of church bells somewhere down the street. At the sixth hour, the door creaked open. Paige appeared again, her face serene. "All right," she said, as if dismissing a delivery man. "You can go home now. Christmas is about forgiveness after all." I didn't answer. I stood, stiff and slow, brushing the snow from my coat. My body felt distant, a vessel running on something colder than anger. I picked up the pie, cold now, edges frozen, and walked back to the truck. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Brian through the window, his arm around Paige, his face pale as the snow he refused to see. When I reached home, the house looked smaller somehow. I turned on the heat, peeled off my gloves, and saw my hands trembling uncontrollably. I poured whiskey into a chipped mug and sat at the table until the shaking stopped. Then my laptop pinged, a new email from the Homeowners Association. Subject: Incident Report, Disturbance at 1420 Lakeview Drive. Attached were photos from a Ring camera, me kneeling in the snow, head bowed, pie beside me like a prop. The complaint filed by Paige Jenkins Fletcher: unstable man causing a scene. I stared at the images until they blurred, then saved them to a new folder. I named it After Christmas. For the first time in years, my thoughts were clear. I had knelt 6 hours in the cold, and somewhere in those 6 hours, mercy froze solid and broke apart. What rose from the pieces wasn't rage, it was resolve, ... If you're still watching and feeling that sting of injustice building inside you, comment, "I'm here," below to let me know you feel it too, because the truth that's about to surface will change everything. The morning after Christmas crawled in gray and heavy, the kind of cold that settled deep in the bones. I woke with my knees aching like they'd been filled with gravel, my body reminding me of every frozen hour I'd spent on that porch. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in years, I didn't reach for the phone to check if Brian had texted. He hadn't. Still, I tried to believe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Paige had pushed him into it. Maybe guilt had him too ashamed to call. A father's instinct doesn't die easily, even after humiliation. Around noon, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. On the fifth attempt, I sent a short message. "Son, I just want to talk. No blame, no anger. Just talk." A few minutes later, the screen flashed "seen." Nothing else. That small word stung more than any insult could. It meant he was there, reading, choosing silence. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the phone, before pulling out a sheet of paper. My handwriting looked shakier than I remembered, but I kept writing. I told him about the first time we built a snow fort together, how his mother laughed when we used kitchen bowls as helmets. I reminded him that forgiveness isn't weakness, that real family doesn't need apologies choreographed by pride. When I sealed the envelope, I wrote his name slowly, deliberately, like a prayer, and walked it down to the post office myself. The next day, I stopped at Maple Roast Cafe for coffee. It was the same place Ellen used to love, the one that still played jazz records on an old turntable. The smell of roasted beans and baked bread almost made me feel human again. I was stirring sugar into my mug when I heard her voice. Paige. She stood near the counter with her mother, both dressed in the kind of casual elegance that screamed money without saying it. For a second, I thought about walking away, but something in me, a mix of stubbornness and misplaced hope, made me step closer. "Paige," I began quietly. "I just wanted to say..." She turned, eyes flat. "You should be grateful we didn't call the cops that night." Her mother added, with a voice dipped in contempt, "Some people just don't know when they're not wanted." The room went still. Even the barista froze, holding a steaming milk pitcher midair. I felt every gaze in that cafe on me, each one pressing like a weight. For a second, anger flared, sharp and bright. Then it faded. I simply nodded, left my coffee untouched on the counter, and walked out into the cold. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and endless. I told myself it didn't matter, that they weren't worth a scene. But as I crossed the street, my phone buzzed, a call from my old friend Ed. "Harold, you've seen Facebook today?" he asked, his voice tight. "No. Why?" Paige posted something on the Spokane community page. She said you harassed them on Christmas Eve. There's a picture from their door camera. People are commenting, man. You'd better look. When the call ended, I opened the app, and there it was, her post. A photo of me, kneeling in the snow, head bowed. The caption read, "Elderly man caused a scene outside our home. Very concerning behavior. Be cautious if you see him around." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, some mocking, some sympathetic, but most cruel. Poor woman, dealing with crazy relatives. He looks unstable. Someone should get him help. My thumb hovered over the screen. I wanted to type something, anything, but words wouldn't change what people had already decided to believe. Instead, I took screenshots of everything, saving them into my After Christmas folder beside the HOA report and the ring footage. Evidence, not revenge. That night, I drove to the cemetery on the south side of town. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked between rows of names, all the people who had finished their battles long ago. Ellen's headstone was dusted white, the carved letters soft around the edges. I brushed the snow away with my glove and sat down on the cold bench nearby. "I tried, Ellen," I whispered. "God knows I did. But they've turned him into someone I don't recognize." The wind sighed through the bare trees, carrying no comfort. Somewhere far off, church bells rang the hour. I stayed until the cold reached through my coat and settled into my chest, until I felt something inside me harden. Not hatred, not yet, but resolve. When I got home, I turned on my computer. The folder After Christmas glowed in the dark like a promise. I opened it, scrolled through the photos, the videos, the letters, the proof of everything they'd done. Then I opened my banking portal and found the section for automatic transfers. My cursor hovered over the edit button. Not yet, I told myself, but soon. On a yellow sticky note beside the screen, I wrote a single line. Mercy ended at the doorstep. Justice begins here. Forgiveness, I realized, is for the living. They left me for dead. If you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, you might rethink that after what's coming. Keep watching. You won't believe how fast peace can turn to war. 3 days after Christmas, the silence in my house had a weight of its own. It wasn't peace, it was absence. The kind of quiet that follows a storm when you know the damage isn't over yet. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by a stack of papers, bank statements, mortgage receipts, and credit card summaries. Numbers lined the pages like tally marks of my own foolishness. 5 years, 60 transfers, $2,800 each month. The total blinked at me from the calculator's screen. $168,000. Add in the down payment and the repairs I'd paid for when their roof leaked, and the number climbed higher than $180,000. Money that had built their home, their Christmas parties, their smart casual dinners. I used to think generosity was the same as love. I thought being the man who gave would make me needed, respected, but all it made me was easy to erase. By noon, I'd made my decision. I picked up the phone and called Columbia Bank, my voice steadier than I felt. "Customer service, this is Rebecca," the woman said, bright and efficient. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I told her. She asked for my information, verified the account. I could hear her typing, the faint clack of keys. "Yes, sir. I see the transaction. $2,800 to Brian Fletcher and Paige Jenkins Fletcher on the 15th of every month. Would you like this canceled immediately?" "Yes," I said. "Effective now." A pause. "Are you sure, Mr. Turner?" "It's been running for 5 years, more than ever," I said quietly. There was another click, then silence. "Done," she said. "You'll receive written confirmation by mail." "Thank you," I replied, and when I hung up, I sat in the quiet again, but this time it felt different. The air seemed lighter, like the walls had exhaled with me. For the first time in years, I wasn't bleeding money to maintain someone else's comfort. I made coffee and watched the steam rise from the mug, curling into the cold air that slipped through the kitchen window. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something close to freedom. Later that afternoon, while sorting the remaining paperwork, I received a call from Ed again. His tone carried that uneasy mix of concern and anger. "You might want to check the Spokane Herald," he said. Page 3. I pulled the paper from my doorstep, unfolded it, and froze. There it was, a headline that punched harder than the cold outside. Local businessman humiliates daughter-in-law's family on Christmas. Below it, a photo of me lifted straight from their Ring camera. The caption twisted the truth into spectacle. Harold Turner disrupted a family gathering after being asked to leave, creating a scene that alarmed neighbors. The article quoted Paige's father, Richard Jenkins, describing me as unwell and emotionally unstable since his wife's passing. Every sentence dripped with crafted sympathy for them. Not a word about the years I'd paid their mortgage, not a whisper about the 6 hours I spent in the snow. I read the article 3 times, then set the paper down and folded it neatly, as if I were handling evidence, because that's exactly what it was. They'd gone public. They wanted to humiliate me into silence, to paint me as the villain before I could speak. Fine. If they wanted war in the daylight, I'd meet them there. I turned on my computer, opened the After Christmas folder, and began sorting through the files. I renamed each one systematically. Exhibit A, HOA notice. Exhibit B, Ring photos. Exhibit C, Facebook post. I added the Herald article as Exhibit D. The screen glowed with quiet purpose. This wasn't revenge, it was preservation. Then I made another call, this time to an old number I hadn't dialed since Ellen's insurance claim years ago. "Sandra Lee," the familiar voice answered. "It's Harold Turner," I said. "I need your help again." When we met that evening at her downtown office, Sandra looked at me like she was seeing a ghost that had decided not to stay buried. I handed her the folder. "They've taken my money, my name, and my son," I said, my voice calm. "Now they'll have to return all 3. She flipped through the pages, her expression tightening. "You have documentation for everything? Every cent, every lie." She closed the folder slowly. "Then, Harold, you have a case. And if we handle this right, you'll not only get your money back, you'll clear your name." I nodded once. "Good." Let's begin. When I drove home that night, the streets were empty, the snow reflecting the dim orange of the streetlights. I stopped at the bridge over the Spokane River, where the wind cut through my coat like glass. Below me, the water moved dark and restless under the ice. I leaned against the rail, breathing the cold until it burned. The man who knelt on a porch begging for belonging was gone. What stood here was something sharper, someone finally done apologizing for existing. "They froze me out of their lives," I whispered to the wind. "Now I'll show them what winter really feels like." January arrived in a silence that felt permanent. The snow hadn't melted since Christmas. It only grew harder, sharper, like the season itself had turned to stone. I spent most mornings sitting by the window, watching the river freeze in slow motion. My case file sat on the table beside me, thick with the weight of proof. Every document, every receipt, every photo, pieces of a life I'd built with love and watched be twisted into humiliation. Sandra had everything she needed to file the lawsuit. All that was left was my word. And yet, I hesitated. The idea of dragging my own son through court turned my stomach. There was a time when the mere thought of him suffering would have undone me, but that time was buried beneath 6 hours of snow and silence. Still, a part of me, the foolish, fatherly part, kept whispering, "Maybe he'll come around. Maybe he'll see what she's done to him." One morning, I found myself digging through an old box in the closet. Inside were fragments of another life: Brian's baby shoes, his crayon drawings, a photo of the 3 of us at the county fair. Ellen was holding cotton candy. Brian was sitting on my shoulders, laughing so hard his eyes disappeared. I held that picture for a long time, tracing the outline of his small hands. I wondered when exactly he stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a burden. That night, as I was closing up the house, my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me in place. Brian. "Dad," he said when I answered, his voice hoarse. "Please don't do this." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Do what?" I asked finally. "The lawsuit," he said. "Paige's parents are panicking. If this goes to court, it'll ruin us. My job, our reputation, it'll all be gone." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. "Everything, or just your pride?" He sighed. "You don't understand. It's complicated. You'll look vindictive. People will think you're just what?" I said softly. "An old man defending himself?" There was a long silence. "Please, Dad," he whispered, "don't destroy what's left." I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the one that had lived there since Ellen's funeral. "You're asking me to protect the people who left me in the snow," I said quietly. "You're asking me to pretend it didn't happen." "I'm asking you to forgive," he said. "Forgiveness," I said, "is earned." He didn't reply. I heard his breath catch on the line, then the dull click of disconnection. I sat there in the dim light, phone still in my hand. The old instinct, mercy, surrender, rose up like a ghost, whispering that I could still choose peace. But peace built on silence wasn't peace at all. It was surrender. The next morning, I drove downtown through the slush-covered streets and climbed the steps to Sandra Lee's office. She was waiting with coffee and the same calm professionalism that had once saved me from losing Ellen's insurance payout years ago. "Morning, Harold," she said gently. "I've gone through everything." "It's airtight," I nodded. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. Financial exploitation, defamation. There's enough here to make a judge choke." She studied my face. "But I need to hear it from you." "Once I file, there's no turning back. You ready for that?" Outside, the snow was falling again, thick and relentless. I thought about Brian's voice on the phone, about the boy who once held my hand to cross a street, and the man who had let me kneel on his porch like a stranger. "Yes," I said finally. "I've been turning back my whole life. It's time to walk forward." Sandra gave a small nod and began typing. The sound of her keyboard filled the room like distant rain. I watched her finalize the paperwork, each line of text sealing a choice I'd postponed for too long. By the time I left her office, the sun was setting behind the frozen rooftops. The light bled red against the snow as I walked to my truck, the court papers in my coat pocket heavier than they should have been. That evening, I emailed the Spokane Herald. I attached the same documents Sandra had filed, the transfers, the ring footage, the HOA letter, everything. I didn't demand a retraction. I asked for something else, a correction of truth. A statement that showed the man behind the photo wasn't dangerous, just done being used. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window. The snow outside caught the streetlight in a faint, golden shimmer. For once, the silence in the house didn't hurt. It felt clean, earned. I lifted the glass in a quiet toast, to Ellen, to the man I used to be, and to the man who'd finally chosen to stop apologizing. "Love built the house they live in," I murmured, watching the snow drift down. "But truth will tear down its walls." If you've ever reached the moment where enough is enough, you'll recognize this next one. The calm before the storm never lasts long, trust me. 2 weeks after Sandra filed the lawsuit, Spokane felt smaller. I couldn't step into the grocery store without someone glancing twice, whispering just loud enough for me to hear my own name. Some looks carried sympathy, others, judgment. That was fine. After 62 years on this earth, I'd learned that truth travels slower than gossip, but it lasts longer. The snow had finally stopped, leaving behind gray piles along the curbs, stiff and dirty. I moved through each day quietly. Coffee at Maple Roast, a walk by the river, then home to read the paper I no longer trusted. I didn't have to speak to anyone. My name was speaking for me now, in court documents, in headlines, in the mouths of strangers. The Jenkins-Fletcher family wasn't quiet either. Paige's father, Richard, tried to spin the story before it spun him. He claimed I'd been confused, grieving, unstable. He called in favors from his old business network, but influence has an expiration date, and his had spoiled. The moment the court acknowledged the financial records I'd provided, every transfer, every mortgage payment, his allies began backing away. Brian's company suspended him pending review. Page's lifestyle column in the Herald was put on hold. Their house, my money's house, was slipping toward default now that the monthly mortgage payment had vanished. A quiet kind of justice was working its way through the cracks, slow and certain. I didn't celebrate. It wasn't in me to enjoy the ruin of my own blood. But there was a peace in knowing the world finally saw them for who they were. One morning, while sipping coffee at Maple Roast, a young journalist approached my table. "Mr. Turner, I'm Rachel Porter with the Herald." She looked nervous, clutching a notepad. I wanted to apologize on behalf of the paper. The previous story didn't represent the truth. I studied her face, too young to carry the guilt of her employer, too brave to hide behind it. "I'm not angry," I said. "Just make sure the next story tells what really happened." She nodded. "Would you be willing to be interviewed?" "I'm not seeking revenge," I said quietly. "I'm seeking the truth." A week later, her article ran under a new headline: "Elderly Father Exposes Financial Abuse Behind Viral Story." It didn't make me proud, but it made me visible again, not as a madman in the snow, but as a man who'd loved too much, too long, without asking for anything in return. Of course, the Jenkinses fought back. They hired a crisis management attorney from Seattle, who released a public statement claiming the allegations were exaggerated and that I was emotionally fragile. They even booked a podcast interview to clarify their side. The host, smelling drama, invited me too. Sandra warned me it might backfire, but I accepted. The studio was small, lined with foam panels and microphones that smelled faintly of dust and ambition. When the recording began, the host tried to steer the conversation towards scandal, money, betrayal, family politics, but I didn't take the bait. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said into the mic. On Christmas Eve, I stood outside my son's house for 6 hours while my family laughed behind a locked door. That's not anger you're hearing in my voice. That's the sound of frost breaking. There was silence in the room, the kind that hums in your ears. The host swallowed hard, then whispered, "They made you kneel?" "Yes," I said simply. "And now, I'm standing." The episode went viral within 24 hours. Thousands of comments poured in, some enraged, some heartbroken. The public opinion turned faster than anyone expected. The Jenkins name, once associated with charity galas and business lunches, became shorthand for cruelty. Brian's company officially terminated him. Page's sponsors withdrew. Their glossy world began to crack piece by piece. The mortgage company sent a foreclosure warning. The house they'd treated as a monument to success was suddenly too large, too cold, too expensive to keep. Meanwhile, my mornings at Maple Roast stayed the same. The barista started giving me my coffee on the house, and old neighbors I hadn't seen in years stopped by to shake my hand. I didn't need their pity. What I wanted was something they couldn't give. Time to feel like a father again, if only in memory. One afternoon, as the ice along the Spokane River began to melt, I found a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, Brian's. The envelope was thin, the kind used when words weigh too much to carry. Dad. I finally understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that. I read it twice, then set it on the kitchen table beside the cold cup of coffee I had been nursing. No apology, no explanation. But somehow, it was enough. Outside the window, the river had started to move again, breaking through its frozen surface. The water shimmered in the weak afternoon sun, rushing forward as if it had somewhere important to go. "They called me cold," I said aloud, watching the current. Maybe they were right, but sometimes, cold is what saves you from drowning. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel frozen. I felt free. A month after the first hearing, the snow in Spokane finally began to melt. The sidewalks were slick with gray slush, and the air smelled faintly of thawing earth and gasoline. I spent most mornings in the same spot, by the kitchen window, a cup of coffee cooling in my hand, watching the neighborhood slowly come back to life. Birds returned, children laughed somewhere down the block, and yet the quiet inside me remained. Sandra called that morning. Her voice carried the weight of restrained satisfaction. "They have agreed to remove all defamatory content," she said. "The court ruled in your favor. They're also offering a public apology and a settlement." I didn't speak right away. I watched a crow land on the fence outside, its black feathers gleaming against the dull sky. "Will it make them understand what they did?" I asked finally. There was a pause on the other end. "Probably not," Sandra said softly, "but it makes it official." Official. The word echoed in my head long after she hung up. There was something hollow about victory when it came stamped and notarized. My reputation was restored, my finances protected, but nothing about this process had made me feel whole. I'd proven them wrong, yes, but it hadn't brought back the sun I lost long before the snow. The final hearing came 2 weeks later. I wore my best suit, the same one from Ellen's funeral. The courthouse smelled of paper and disinfectant, the air too warm for winter. When I entered the courtroom, Brian was already there, sitting beside his attorney. His hair had gone slightly gray at the temples. His face was drawn, thinner than I remembered. Paige wasn't with him. He looked up briefly when I walked past, and for a flicker of a second, I saw something. Shame, maybe, or exhaustion. When the judge asked if he wanted to speak, Brian stood, hands trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can fix what I've done," he said, "but I'll stop pretending it didn't happen." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require answers. Afterward, people shook my hand. Sandra smiled faintly, papers in hand, saying, "It's done, Harold. You can rest now." But rest wasn't the right word. It wasn't rest I wanted. It was release. A few days later, Rachel Porter from the Herald reached out again. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I've been contacted by a national news program called Elder Justice. They're interested in your story. Would you consider appearing?" I hesitated. I had no appetite for attention. But she explained that their series focused on elder financial abuse, how families manipulated parents into surrendering control. "Your story could help people," she said. "You could give them the courage to fight back." That made me pause. For months I'd been surviving out of instinct, defending myself against betrayal. Maybe it was time to do something different, to use what happened for something that mattered. "All right," I told her, "but I'm not performing for anyone. I'll just tell it how it was." The studio lights were harsh when I sat in the chair. The host asked gentle, measured questions about loneliness, money, and family. When it came time to describe Christmas Eve, I spoke plainly. "I wasn't angry that night," I said into the camera. "I was heartbroken." They thought money made them safe, that I'd never take it away because I loved them. But love built the house they live in, and truth tore down its walls. They thought cold was cruelty, but sometimes cold is what keeps you alive. There was a hush in the room when I finished. No applause, no pity, just quiet respect. The segment aired a week later. Letters began arriving, handwritten notes from people across the country. Elderly men and women who'd been used, ignored, and dismissed. Some enclosed photos of their children. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for speaking for us." I read every one of them. For the first time since Ellen's passing, I felt something close to purpose. Not revenge, not pride, just the quiet dignity of knowing I'd turned pain into warning, isolation into light. One evening, I decided to clean the house. I dusted the mantle, straightened the old photo frames, and hung a picture I hadn't looked at in years. Ellen holding Brian as a baby, both smiling wide and unbroken. I set it beside my chair, where the sunlight could find it in the morning. Outside, the last of the snow was melting, revealing green shoots of early spring. The air smelled of wet soil and possibility. I poured a small glass of whiskey and stood at the window. The reflection looking back at me was older, quieter, but alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Maybe justice isn't about punishment, I thought. Maybe it's about remembering who you are after the storm. I raised the glass toward Ellen's picture. "We made it through winter," I whispered. "Finally." If you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they'd already broken you, don't look away now. The ending will remind you exactly why you should never count someone out. 2 months after the episode of Elder Justice aired, Spokane felt softer somehow. The bite of winter had given way to a cool, forgiving spring. Lawns were greening again, and the scent of wet pine drifted through the air after every rain. My mailbox still filled each week with letters from people who had seen the broadcast, some thanking me, others confiding in me. I read each one carefully, then stacked them in a wooden box I kept by the window. The newspapers stopped calling. The noise faded, and in the silence that followed, I found something like peace. I turned my focus inward. I planted tomatoes in the small patch of soil behind my house and built a bench overlooking the Spokane River. The rhythm of digging, watering, and waiting for green shoots to appear was the kind of therapy no court could give. Every morning, I walked down to the water's edge with a thermos of coffee and watched the light play on the rippling surface. The world kept moving, and for once, I was content to move slowly with it. The local community center invited me to speak at a class on financial awareness for older adults. I hesitated, but finally agreed. Once a week, I stood before a room of gray-haired faces and told them what I wished someone had told me. Don't hand over control just because you love someone. Love doesn't mean surrender. Some nodded with tears in their eyes. Others took notes with trembling hands. I didn't see myself as a teacher, only a warning come to life. Then one afternoon, as I was locking up after class, I saw him. Brian stood near the parking lot, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, head slightly bowed. For a moment, neither of us moved. The last time I'd seen my son, he was in a courtroom, avoiding my eyes. Now, under the weak spring sun, he looked smaller, thinner, like the weight of his choices had carved him down. "Dad," he said finally. His voice cracked on the word. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He stepped closer. "I thought I was protecting my family," he said quietly. "I didn't realize I was destroying my father." There were 100 things I could have said. Every wound, every sleepless night, but none of them mattered anymore. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd betrayed me, but the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck after fishing trips, head on my shoulder. "You can rebuild houses," I said softly. "Not time." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I know." We walked together down to the river, saying little. The wind carried the faint smell of rain, and the water murmured over the stones like a language older than regret. Before we parted, I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness, at least not the kind people write about, but it was enough to stop the bleeding between us. That night, I decided to clean the old oak cabinet in the living room. Inside, beneath stacks of photo albums and old letters, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a sealed envelope in Ellen's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. If he ever loses his way, remind him that love isn't about shelter, it's about light. Her words hit me like sunlight breaking through a storm. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. All these months I'd fought to defend what was mine, but Ellen had known all along that the real battle wasn't for money or reputation. It was for the light inside the people we love, even when they've turned away from it. I placed the letter back into the envelope and set it on the mantel beside her photograph. For the first time in years, I cried, not from pain, but from understanding. The next morning, I sat on the porch as the sun rose over the river. A warm breeze carried the scent of budding lilacs. My coffee steamed in the cool air. On the table beside me lay Ellen's letter, a photograph of Brian as a boy, and the first tomato sprout of the season pushing through the soil. I thought about everything that had happened, the snow, the silence, the lawsuit, the reckoning, and realized the story had never really been about revenge. It was about remembering who I was when everything else was stripped away. "They thought winter had broken me," I said quietly, watching the water glint gold in the morning light. "But winter only teaches the heart how to survive." I leaned back in the chair, letting the sun warm my face. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for forgiveness. I was already free. A full year had passed since that brutal Christmas, the night my own son left me kneeling in the snow like a beggar. Spokane lay under the same blanket of white again, but this time, the cold felt different. It no longer bit at my bones or whispered humiliation into my ears. I stood by the window of my warm house, cocoa in hand, watching snowflakes swirl beneath the porch light, like tiny forgivenesses drifting from the sky. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. A modest tree stood in the corner, trimmed with old ornaments Ellen had collected over the years. Near the top hung a faded photo of her and Brian as a boy, grinning with missing teeth, his arm wrapped around her neck. I traced the frame with my thumb and smiled. It didn't hurt anymore, not the memory, not even the loss. Pain had burned itself out, leaving only clarity in its ashes. I'd built a new rhythm to my life. Mornings were for walking the river trail with a thermos of coffee. Afternoons for volunteering at the community center. Nights for reading, writing, and sometimes listening to the old jazz records Ellen used to hum along to. My circle had grown unexpectedly. A few widowers, a retired teacher, a nurse who'd been cut off by her children after refusing to sell her house. We met on Thursdays, drank coffee, and shared the quiet language of people who had learned how to rebuild. That Christmas Eve, I thought I'd spend the night alone again, content in the silence. The fire crackled, my hands rested around the warm mug, and I watched the world outside grow soft beneath the snow. I was halfway through Ellen's favorite carol when my phone buzzed on the table. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name glowing on the screen. Brian. For a moment, my chest went hollow. 1,000 memories fought to surface. The anger, the courtroom, the letter of foreclosure. I stared at the phone until the ringing stopped. Then, just as the final chime faded, it rang again. I answered. "Dad," he said. His voice was careful, uncertain. "I don't deserve to ask, but can we come by tomorrow? Paige wants our kids to meet their grandfather." I didn't speak right away. I could hear faint laughter in the background. Children, maybe 7 or 8 years old. My grandchildren. For a year, they'd been only names in someone else's story. Finally, I said, "The door's not locked, son. But this time, you knock before you come in." He exhaled, a sound that carried both relief and shame. "I will." When the call ended, I stood there for a long time, staring at the snow outside. My heart didn't race. It just settled, calm and steady. Ellen had always said life would give you the same lessons until you learn to live them differently. Maybe this was mine. One more winter, but no longer frozen inside it. Christmas morning came quietly. The first knock on my door startled me, even though I had been waiting since dawn. I opened it to see Brian standing there, a little older, a little smaller, holding a casserole dish that steamed in the crisp air. Beside him stood Paige, smiling nervously, and 2 bright-eyed children clutching gifts wrapped in crooked bows. "Grandpa," the girl said shyly, "we made cookies." I knelt to take them from her, the warmth of the tin seeping into my palms. "Then I guess we'd better eat them before they melt." Laughter filled the doorway, awkward at first, then easier. Brian stepped inside and looked around, his eyes landing on the photo of Ellen. "You kept it," he said quietly. "Of course," I replied. She'd never forgive me if I didn't. The morning unfolded like sunlight through a crack in the clouds. We talked, slowly at first, about small things, the weather, the kids' school, the garden out back. Paige complimented the cocoa. The children chased each other around the living room, giggling. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, I felt something shift, an old weight lifting, leaving space for something gentler. When they left that afternoon, Brian lingered by the doorway. "Dad," he said, "thank you for answering." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just don't waste the second chance, son. They don't come often." He nodded, eyes bright. "I won't." I watched them walk down the path, their footprints marking a perfect trail through the snow. For once, I didn't feel the need to follow. Inside, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The same one I'd started the night I canceled his mortgage. My pen moved slowly across the page. I once thought revenge was justice, I wrote, but real justice is peace. Outside, the sky deepened to gold, then violet. The snow glowed under the fading light, soft and endless. I closed the journal, leaned back, and whispered to the empty room, "The cold doesn't last forever. Sometimes it just teaches you how to keep the fire alive." Through the window, the little house glowed warm against the winter night, a small, steady light that had finally learned to shine on its own. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.